Joining us now is Dr. Dietrich von Biedenfeld. Dr. von Biedenfeld, when we take a look at what one U.S. congressman said, he described this as a worldwide sex trafficking ring with people from other countries sourcing young children for Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators' names, and it involved men and women. And of course, some of those names that were redacted, we're talking about possibly six powerful men have now been identified on the floor of Congress, in Congress, to protect members of Congress from saying their name in a lawsuit. But your thoughts about what we're seeing more identities, and we're talking about powerful people from around the world who have been implicated or accused of being a part of this worldwide sex trafficking ring that involve underage girls.
Absolutely. And there's an old adage, birds of a feather flock together. And the question is, have individuals been manipulated, creating national security concerns? We've seen several high profile resignations across Europe because the question is, what was compromised? We know that strict liability prohibits engagement of this activity with minors, regardless of whether you knew their age or not. And so individuals could be subject to criminal liability, human trafficking, outside of statutes of limitation that really suggest that members of Congress, the former owners of or managing directors of Victoria's Secret and other high-profile companies, individuals, former presidents, these individuals all have connections and access to information that, if they were tied to this sex trafficking ring, it's very likely that they were compromised. And did they reveal things in the moments of passion? Were they extorted or otherwise manipulated into providing information? All of these things present grave questions of national security and public scrutiny that I think this representative is appropriately questioning.
How ugly will this get, and how ugly was this whole trafficking ring when we take a look at it for the average person who hadn't followed this much? Just how bad did it get? What are we hearing when it comes to allegations? And of course, what's been proven with Jeffrey Epstein, who took his own life. And of course, he was convicted and serving time when he, according to investigators, took his own life. There are people who question that.
Absolutely. And to your point, according to investigators, I wasn't there, you weren't there. We don't know how these things happen. And when we think about individuals who are highly powerful, who can maneuver the Bureau of Prisons officials or other federally authorized officials to cut off security cameras or otherwise maneuver certain individuals into spaces that are otherwise intended to be secured, we won't know for quite a while, probably until some of the individuals named in that list are deceased, and then those individuals who are protecting them and their names and identities are either lacking that sort of concern about repercussions or retaliation. We won't know the full extent of this. It's very damaging. The victims, of course, we've seen one major accuser die. And of course, we have lots of allegations and even concerns publicly stated that individuals such as Ghislaine Maxwell, that she will die if she testifies.
Now, when we talk about this, we've heard, a lot of people have these conspiracy theories about the wealthy engaging in sex with underage. Well, this is making it reality. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore when you hear some of these allegations and, you see some of these very powerful people on this list that members of Congress have called out.
Well, it really damages the public trust because we've seen where national security officials were spying on ex-girlfriends, tapping their phones, looking in security footage, using satellites to spy on individuals engaged in activities. And so when we think about that at low levels of analysts and other sort of surveillance personnel at the National Security Agency, then we have to think how much more so for former presidents, for billionaire executives of major technology companies. How much of this intertwined sort of relationship is going to come into play as far as their shared manipulation, an agreed upon covenant to keep these things secret, and of course, how damaging, how many of these women have and victims have not come forward because of fear of reprisal, particularly in light of those who have died.
Now, when we talk about Many of the identities have now been released by Congress. This is after threats from members of Congress. Those names were initially redacted. Now those names have been made public or at least available to members of Congress. But many of the victims and their attorneys have said, well, they had no problem releasing our name. The government didn't try to protect our identities. Our names were clear as day on some of the documents. I mean, and what are we to think of that when we are hearing that the government is or attempted to protect the very wealthy and redact their names on these documents, but put the victims out there and let them fend for themselves, and their names are now very public.
This further undermines and damages public trust in government. I mean, at the end of the day, when you think about high powered executives and, of course, the donor structure, the Citizens United ruling, going back to some of the Supreme Court precedent that allows for corporations to be treated like people for political donations, when we think about possible core connections with Epstein and foreign intelligence services, all of these behaviors, the selective redacting of names that exposes victims to further liability while protecting politicians and billionaires. This all erodes public trust and really makes it seem much more nefarious, because the question is, what are you hiding? Because if this was simply a leisure island, or if individuals were engaged in illicit conduct that affected purely spousal relationships, this would not be such a major cover up. So we're then increasing the certainty of the public that these are illegal acts occurring, these are underage individuals, and that there are elements of human trafficking and exploitation that are occurring. It further cements our certainty that these are occurring. So it's very damaging. It also undermines our trust in our own law enforcement agencies if they're unable to effectively redact the names that they are most probably supposed to redact, such as those of the victims. So it's a lot of harmful actions. And again, the names that are being released, the connections are reinforcing a lot of things that were rumors. Of course, we've seen individuals in politics talking about aliens and these unidentified flying objects lately. This is on that same level, where we say we had suspicions that are now confirmed, that there is a cabal of senior leadership, executives, and other investors who are creating these environments to engage in illegal conduct and operating outside of the law. Basically, they are above the law and they don't want to be respond to anyone.
And of course, now the public, our eyes are wide open. Let's see what happens next. Dr.
Absolutely.
Dietrich von Bietenfeld, thank you for joining us here on the Factor Uncensored Off the Clock.